Yeah, my name is Hakwan. I'm the person running this course, but the teaching actually will be done by a bunch of much more qualified, um, real experts on zero knowledge proof. I'm very glad that you're here. This is a kind of like a new experiment. So since I told you my background is not really in computer science, if you want to look up, this is the link that is there. You can see I'm actually a neuroscientist by training. But I've been in tertiary education for basically half of my life. Actually less than half of my life. I've been a professor for 14 years, and recently I left. I gave up my tenured position at UCLA, and that's for a number of personal and professional reasons. But one of the issues is I really dislike teaching where knowing that my students are getting into debt sometimes to come into class, and that really was one of the most frustrating thing in teaching, even in a large, wealthy, well-funded public school like UCLA. So we are experimenting with a kind of new model here, what we call learn to earn. And some of you might be here for that reason, and that's fine. That's part of the interesting feature of this course is that basically we're trying to, instead of making it free, making the course free, then some of you will see lack of financial commitment. You don't have to pay the tuition you may, some people tend to drop out. So instead of binding you to a contract and make you put down a payment, we instead will give you money. So just by completing the assignments on time and satisfactorily, we'll give each person $200. And each week there will be various other incentives to keep you motivated. I think it's a little bit crazy. I think some of my colleagues might think that we are out of our minds. But we believe that at Harmony, as an industry leader, is kind of our jobs to provide education and to basically help bring value to the whole system and uplift each other. So I hope that it works. It's a bit of an experiment. Now, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, because the assignments may be harder than you think. So assignment 0 has already been posted online. It will be finalized right after the class, and we'll announce it on Discord. And it might be harder than you think. So some of you come in might be much less prepared than you need to be. Zero knowledge proof is what Vitalik Buterin once called moon math. It is not exactly very easy, but we'll try to see how much we can face the challenge. But if you drop out, no hard feelings, and there are different plans and different things you can do. We might also later on try to organize some other courses that are easier in terms of the technicality required. The other thing is try to help each other. This is not really a university. You see the setup is very different. We don't charge tuition fees, and nor is it just like we dump some content online and let you study. This is really the pay structure and everything, and the Discord and having people here is to help you build this community mentality. So this is a bit like a paid, think of it as a paid study group where you get paid, not you have to pay to join, and help each other. There will be, if you do good things for the community, you will be noticed, and we will try to reward you accordingly and incentivize you. The final goal is obvious. Zero knowledge proof is very hard. I don't think myself as an academic, or even the TAs, or even maybe some of the instructors would claim to be a true master in the topic, even by the end of the course. Some aspects are really very hard. I struggle to understand some of the math myself. But the goal here is not to be a master in everything. Rather, we want to set a concrete goal is that you should be able to launch a product on mainnet. I mean, any mainnet. It can be ETH, can be XDAI, whatever you like to be able to really deploy a protocol by the end of the course. It doesn't have to be everything from scratch. I think that will be very hard. Some of you might want to, if you have the technical know-how, by all means. But some of you might want to fork someone else's project and add some embellishments to make it your own, or just port something to do something that actually would make an impact. And if you do choose to launch it on Harmony One, there will be other incentives, such as those $50,000 launch grants that we will help you to develop and propose and try to help you get those grants to actually launch your careers as well. So the rough format of the class is we meet twice a week. So today would be a lecture. Sometimes the lecture will be given live. Sometimes they will be recorded. So you should, make time to study the lecture before, so that the class becomes more discussion based. We will mix and match just so that it's less boring, and we'll see what works the best for you. And then after Thursday, typically after the class, we'll announce the assignment. That's only for the first half of the course, so it's not going to be 7 assignments. It's only going to be 4, including today's assignment. So after that, you should try to do the assignment on your own. Again, we won't be hand-holding you. This is not a college, undergraduate course. Try to do the assignment on your own as much as you can from Thursday till Monday. We'll give you a chance to ask questions, and then Monday we will try to troubleshoot together with you why the assignments might be too challenging. And then by Wednesday, you have to hand in your assignment. So you see that the whole thing can be quite Q&A driven. So we thought about making the course really small, like 5 to 10 people. Then it can be really like an open seminar. But in the end, we also really want to benefit as many of you as possible. So what we'll do is we hire 2 TAs. I'll introduce them. And they will basically be curating your questions. So you can write your questions on Discord, but better still, there will be an interface that we'll use for you to post your question. You can vote up and down the questions, and then they will be basically curating the questions and then addressing them and raising them on your behalf. So let me pause here a bit and let Hunter and Cathie wave to say hi. Can you say a word to who you are too? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Hunter. I'm a PhD student in cognitive science at UCLA. That's how I know Hakwan. And he was my introduction to Harmony. And I'm just really excited to work on educational stuff that I think has real world impact, rather than kind of the stuff that you may experience in a normal university setting. My research is generally focused on what I call cognitive data science. So kind of the intersection of human-computer interaction, cognitive science, and experimental psychology. So I'm interested to learn more about pretty much the future of technology and thinking about how humans interact with it, or will interact with it.
Right. Hi, everyone. This is Cathie. I'm from Hong Kong, and I actually just got my PhD under the supervision of Hakwan. So my PhD is in neuroscience, but really what I do is machine learning to analyze brain imaging data. So currently I'm working as a data scientist in the fintech startup industry, but then I'm very keen to just get a head start in the blockchain area as well. So I want to kind of make myself familiar with the most cutting edge technology that is in blockchain. So thank you, and nice to meet you. Look forward to learning together throughout this course.
Thank you. Yes, I'm aware I did not unmute myself, and then I'm now stuck. Okay, now I'm back. Good. Good. So we talk about the format of the course. The class details. So I told you I've been a professor for over a decade. One thing I know is people don't read the syllabus, so you must read the syllabus. We don't label it as a syllabus, but go to CKU, read the docs. There's just a couple of them. It will tell you the class details, and sometimes we'll update, and it will be reflected there as well. So that's basically all the regulations. In case of you really care about the cash prizes, the regulations are there. Having said that, I really also really want you guys to use Discord and check your emails. Because things would change. Bear with us. This is, we call it a university, but of course it's not a real university. There's a disclaimer. We are not an officially approved entity for giving tertiary education. This is more like an online study group with a lot of subsidies given by Harmony to make things more interesting and more exciting, and help from professors like Pyrros, who are basically giving the time to us for free. So there will be a lot of glitches and things that we don't expect. This is also the internet, you know, we don't know each of you so well in person yet, so we will improvise. So there will be things that will change along the way. So a lot of things, especially the topics of the course and the classes, we will try to modify to adjust to the level of difficulty and interest that will be suitable for you. So use Discord, raise questions, help each other answer questions, and also check your emails. There will be announcement now and then that if things change. So, okay, I think I'm done. Any questions so far? You can post it on the chat if you do. Let's see that basically it's good. Yes. So if that's the case, then without further ado, I will let Pyrros give the introductory lecture, which I'm really looking forward to myself.
Sure. So thank you for the introduction, Hakwan. I'm Pyrros. I'm actually a researcher at the University of Athens, and as it so happens, my primary research area is zero knowledge. So today we'll be taking a very high-level approach at what zero knowledge protocols aim to do, and have a brief discussion on what the core notions of zero knowledge are and how these can be useful to you in formulating your use of them. Right. So somebody's saying that the screen sharing is
a little awkward. I don't know what.
Okay.
There we go. It's working now.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. Right. So actually, I think there's not too many of us. So potentially we can experiment with people unmuting themselves and having a discussion as we go through the slides. Well, let's have a discussion. So, well, everybody's seen an ATM and probably has a bank card. And well, what's the standard problem behind the ATMs and bank cards? Anyone want to volunteer their thoughts? Text should be fine as well, as long as I don't forget to check chat. There's a middleman. Well, there could be a middleman, or actually a behind you man, right? So the guy who's in the middle, or the guy who just put an extra pin pad on top of the real one. They can see what buttons you're pushing, and they will know your pin. And once they pickpocket your card, they will empty your bank account, right? So this whole protocol of putting in your PIN to prove that you are the legitimate owner of your card has this problem in that it leaks your PIN. So once your PIN is leaked, then your money is gone. And then you no longer have a security problem because you no longer have any money. Right. So there's a slightly different version of this protocol, and apparently now people should be able to unmute themselves. So feel free to make use of that. So there's protocols for logging into oftentimes bank applications that only ask for a few digits of your secret number or your secret password. And that is obviously made this way so that if I steal your third digit and I try to log in, maybe I'm going to be asked about the second, fifth digit, and then I can't log in and I can't steal your money directly. But there's a couple of issues with that as well, right?
Are you referring to social hacking or?
Let's start with simple stuff and try and build from there. So
Cool.
Combination of numbers. Like
Yeah.
Yes. So some two very good answers from chat actually very complimentary. So one person is correctly pointing out that after a few sessions of this, the entirety of the password will leak out, right? Because we only have a few digits, and if we're quote unquote burning 2 at a time, at some point all the digits will be burned. And there is also another interesting property of this, is that the combinatorics are actually more beneficial for the attacker. So if the attacker was trying to just brute force a 4-digit PIN, he has a 1 in 1,000 chance of guessing right. If he's trying to guess 2 digits, he has a 1 in 100 chance of guessing right. So this is, in a way, a weaker protocol. And, well, banks support that by adding risk management, browser identification, another form of authentication, an extra password, and what have you. But the protocol by itself has actually been weakened to make it not leak as much info. So there's this tension in that the first protocol we saw leaked a lot of info. The second protocol leaks less info, but it's actually weaker. So it seems like there's this tension behind protecting privacy and protecting against snooping, and at the same time actually having a level of security that is adequate for what we're trying to do. And keeping with the soft examples, let's imagine a situation where somebody's applying for a job, right? And let's say it's a programming job. So what the company requires of the applicant is them to be hired. So I'll put up an ad asking for somebody who has, I don't know, let's say 15 years of blockchain development experience, right? That's a very reasonable ad. But I need to make sure that the applicant I hire is actually qualified, because by the time I go through training, I give them their first assignments and get results back, it might be a few months and a few $1,000s into the hole until I know I have the right applicant. So what I would like as a company would be to give people a test assignment and hire them if they actually perform well in that. But, well, ideally, the test assignment would be something useful to me. On the other hand, that would essentially be having people work for free and me having the promise of hiring them as an incentive. And in general, people do not want to work for free. That is how things work. And at the same time, people will happily claim that they have 15 years of blockchain development experience, even if that is somewhat suspect. So how do people actually test people's skills before hiring them? Well, they use a protocol that looks like this. They tell people a story about this farmer who has a goat. He has some corn, and somehow a wolf has also ended up with the farmer, and they want to cross the river, but the boat only holds 2 items at a time, and the applicant is asked to find a solution. Now, is this a problem that is useful? No, absolutely not. But why are these questions popular? Well, I would argue these questions are popular exactly because they have this property of being useless, and also they can be answered in a small time frame. So essentially what this test in an interview tries to maintain is that it sets a bar so that applicants that are actually good at what they're claiming will succeed. Applicants who don't know what they're doing will fail. And at the same time, it maintains that this is not real work. This is not something that will take months. This is not something that seems unfair to a potential applicant because he's working for free. It's clear that if Google is asking you about goats and boats and farmers, they're not really entering the goat transportation business, at least to my best knowledge. They're just trying to test your logic and your problem-solving skills. And of course, a property we would like such a test to have is that it does not take all day. So how does that link into zero knowledge? Well, zero knowledge is actually 30-something years old. And it started out with a paper from Goldwasser, Micali, and Rakov that introduced the concept of zero knowledge protocols. So what these protocols do is that they allow an interaction between two parties where one party will convince the other that a certain fact is true. And that by doing something like, I am a qualified applicant for the position that you are offering. At the same time, during the execution of this protocol, what the second party will learn is only if the statement is true or not. They will not learn why the statement is true. So to go back to our first example, by using a zero knowledge protocol for authentication, we do not reveal the information that authenticates us. So what we are demonstrating is that we are the legitimate owner of this bank card because we know the PIN, but we do so without revealing the PIN. So a second important milestone in this process was that of Fiat Shamir, who introduced a very simple technique to make such protocols non-interactive. And this is very important because in practical applications, interaction is actually hard to arrange. So in a blockchain, what you usually want to happen is that you will send a single message to a smart contract and something will happen. What you don't want to happen is you will send a message, the smart contract will send something back to you, and then you need to reply to it and do that over multiple rounds. This will introduce a very large number of problems because then the smart contract needs to keep track of things, which means that it needs to store some sort of state, which makes it more expensive, which makes everything more complex, and which makes everybody have a bad time. So ideally, what we want is that we want protocols that only work in a single round. The prover says, this is true and this is why, and the verifier checks that and says, sure, that makes sense, or no, I don't believe you. And again, the here's why is a zero knowledge proof that will not reveal any actual information. Further work from Bloom, Feldman, and Micali gave a wider range of protocols that could be turned non-interactive and actually proved that anything in NP can be done by using what's called the common random string. We will get to that in a bit. So to begin with, let's settle on the terminology that we'll be using. And that is that of relations, statements, and witnesses. So suppose that what I'm trying to build is a protocol that solves the following problem. I know some secret such that the hash of that secret equals such and such value. And this looks very, very similar to a standard authentication on a web page, right? So the server has this hash of your password, and then you're trying to prove that you know this password that hashes to what the server knows. So this is reasonably close to the real world. So in zero knowledge terms, we have a statement, a witness, and a relation. So the statement is the public data describing the instance that we're trying to prove. And in this case, it is the hash value, right? So I am trying to show something that is true concerning that hash value, and that hash value is in the domain of the protocol public. Now, the protocol treats the hash value as public. This does not mean that you need to show it in the entire world, right? So if I'm authenticating to a server, then again, in the eyes of the protocol, the hash value is public, but there is no reason for the server to broadcast that value to the entirety of the web. But in the eyes of the zero knowledge protocol, hash value is public. Then we have the witness. The witness is private data known only to the prover that is actually what supports our statement being correct. And in this case, it's the word secret, or actually our password, right? And then we arrive at the relation. And the relation is the key behind this protocol. It essentially describes what equation or what set of equations needs to hold between the public and the private data for the statement to actually be true. So in this case, we have this relation between the witness and the statement that simply says that the relation is true if the hash value X is actually equal to the hash of the witness. And this essentially describes what the protocol is doing. It does not tell us how it does it, but it tells us at a reasonably high level what this protocol is supposed to accomplish. So once we have defined statements, witnesses, and relations, we can also say that a statement might be true or it might be false. So a statement is true if there is a witness that makes it true. And again, if we have the witness at hand, or if we have a candidate witness, it's easy to check if the relation is true or not. We just evaluate its definition, right? So here we have X, check if X is equal to H of W. If somebody gives us some value of W and some value of X, we could just run the hash and see if they match. So once we have some candidate value of W, it's very easy to determine if that value is appropriate for a statement X. What is harder to do is to check if a statement X happens to have some value of W that makes it true. Now, a statement is false if there is no value of W that makes it true. And in many cases, this might or might not be trivial. So as a semi-cute example, suppose that our hash function is SHA-256. So SHA-256 is a cryptographic hash function that will take essentially an input of any size you want, and it will give you an output of exactly 256 bits, which have some very attractive cryptographic properties. So given this protocol, let's try and find a statement that is actually provably false. So we want to find some sort of bit string or byte string or whatever you want to call it, X, such that there is no possible input to SHA-256 so that SHA-256 will output X. Okay, there's an answer in the chat. That makes sense, but it might need some elaborating.
Would anything less than 256 bits be something that SHA-256 would not emit?
Exactly. So the answer in chat is X equals 1. And depending on how you twist your head, you might think of 1 as being 1 expressed in a series of zeros and then a trailing 1, which is a possible output. But strictly speaking, if you treat the output as a string, then a single bit that is 1 is not a possible output without adding some imaginary initial zeros in front of it. So in this protocol, it's quite trivial to come up with false statements. Now, if we somehow limited this protocol into bit strings that are only exactly 256 bits, then probably there is no false statement. And this is a very tricky area that we will revisit. So now that we know what we're talking about, let's see what the usual promises that zero knowledge protocols provide us with look like. And these are properties that are enjoyed by pretty much any decent zero knowledge protocol. In fact, usually we have some stronger ones. So first off, we have completeness. And completeness, very simply speaking, says that if everybody does what they're supposed to do, the protocol works. So if we have a true statement and the appropriate witness, and we give them to the prover, then the prover will succeed in convincing the verifier. And a crucial point here is that the verifier is given the statement as an input, but not the witness. Otherwise, that would be trivial, right? Now, the more interesting properties are that of soundness and zero knowledge. So soundness in the plain version is quite simple. It says that, well, if X is a false statement, the verifier will reject it. But as we talked about a couple minutes ago, on some protocols, false statements are very easy to weed out. And in some cases, false statements might not even exist. So in fact, we oftentimes need something that is stronger than standard soundness. And that is called knowledge soundness. And knowledge soundness says something else. It says that if the prover can convince the verifier that X is true, not only is there some witness, but we can actually find it, right? Because that is the hard part. I mean, I can tell you that there is some pre-image so that the SHA-256 will output all zeros, and you will probably believe me when I'm telling you that there is such a pre-image, but that's of no value. The interesting part is that, can you get to that pre-image? And this is what we require of such protocols. So in a knowledge sound zero knowledge protocol, if I can convince you that I know of such a value, then the proof promises that there is some way to get that value out of me in very specific circumstances, though. Finally, the third property is that of zero knowledge. And it says that if X is a true statement, then we can actually simulate the logs of this protocol using only X, so without W. And this is also worded in a very curious way, right? So what does it mean that we can simulate the execution logs? Well, if we can simulate something using only X, then logs are useless, right? Because if these logs were useful, then we could build some on our own, and would be able to do whatever useful thing these logs can do for us. So this is a very roundabout way of saying that logs of execution of this protocol are useless. And why are they useless? Because anybody can build them. So seeing the log has no value. And to give some intuition to this very, very paradoxical thought, suppose that I come up with a pre-recorded video that shows me explaining in very great detail how the farmer can get his goat and his corn and his wolf to the other side of the river. Would you hire me because of that? Clearly not. So why would you not hire me if I gave you a very nice explanation about the goat, corn, wolf problem? I might have cheated. Anyone can reproduce it, yes. So the value behind the problem is not actually in the solution. It's in having you ask the question, knowing that the question is fresh, and seeing me struggle. Because I didn't do it on the spot. Exactly. So this is what essentially the zero knowledge property captures. It says that unless you are seeing somebody in the spot taking part in the protocol, then nothing is worth anything. I mean, I could have Googled the answer and just made a video about it. So seeing a transcript of the goat problem has no value. What has value is you being able to ask the questions that you want and seeing me reply to them. So are the core properties clear, at least this far? Okay. Now, it seems that completeness might have the short end of the stick in that it just says that the protocol works. And well, of course, the protocol works because otherwise nobody would bother to even write it up, right? Actually, it's not as trivial. You can pick any two of the three properties and devise a super simple protocol that will solve your problem. So imagine we have this relation R of X and W, which represents either hashing pre-images and passwords into hash values, or it represents PIN numbers and bank accounts. And we're trying to devise a protocol that that implements that, but we don't need the zero knowledge property. So how could we solve that if we don't need any zero knowledge? What's a good way for me to convince you that I know of a secret S such that hash of S equals, I know, 1 to 3?
You just send the secret along with it.
So can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so the question that I had earlier is that considering the idea that logs themselves, like when you pull them up, are useless, what is the context of having a protocol that's soundness and like its ability to like reference the actual value of a particular like object on chain? Like what is the significance of that versus having the proof be actually completely like open, if that makes sense?
Right. So in the interactive version, the difference between simulation and real world usage is doing it live, essentially. So the way in which we cheat in the interactive version is that we will do things out of order. So in a proper interview, I would go to the interview they would decide on the question to ask me, and then I would answer. If I was trying to cheat, I would decide on a question, look the answer up on the internet, and then prepare for that and answer just that. Now, for non-interactive protocols, the technique we use to cheat is different, but the end result is the same. And this is a point that we will arrive at the end of the talk. And the takeaway is that there needs to be some difference in power that enables this cheating when we're arguing the proof in the theory part, but cannot occur in the real world. So in a real interview, I do not know the question ahead of time. And that is why a real interview has actual weight. Now, on a non-interactive proof, the reasoning is different because the cheating is different. So essentially, the research paper version of a protocol would tell you essentially which way we cheat. And the way in which we cheat is not something that is realizable in actual quote unquote production use. But the argument saying that these proofs could have been produced in a cheating way will still hold value in real use.
In what cases specifically?
So for a concrete version, let's look at most snarks. So most snarks will tell you that if the person doing the proof knows the entirety of the randomness that went into the common reference string, then they can cheat.
Gotcha. Okay.
So
then that means that
the argument.
Go ahead.
The argument goes that when you are trying to make the proof, you do not actually know all that randomness, so you cannot cheat. But when you are given a proof and you're thinking of arguing that, well, maybe I can look into the proof and extract some information in some magical way, then there is this argument that says, well, the universe might have conspired against you and used all that knowledge of the randomness to actually give you a fake proof.
Gotcha.
So the reason why we are able to have these seemingly contradictory properties at the same time is because they both require some cheating, or to put it in a nicer way, they're both hypothetical on some specific situation, and neither situation is actually a representation of real world usage. Okay, that was a bit of a sidetrack, but it's material that was worth covering, and it's actually coming up in the slides. So coming back into this trivial example, we mentioned that completeness and soundness without zero knowledge is very, very easy. You just send the witness to the verifier and have the verifier check, right? So essentially you still put in your PIN in the PIN pad, and the bank checks, and everybody else knows your password, but that's fine. It was not one of the requirements. So how can we get soundness and zero knowledge without completeness? Again, for the example, you can imagine we have this this protocol about hashes, but you could also imagine any other protocol of this format.
Could you bring up the soundness property again? Sorry.
Sure.
would it be trivial in that other protocol that there is no false? That like
That's a good point. But also, you could go more trivial than that. You could have a protocol that rejects always. And this is super secure. Nobody will get passed by you. Extremely secure. There is no cheating prover for that protocol. None at all. It's also a useless protocol, but nobody can cheat. So essentially, this tells us that completeness is actually worth something. It's what forces the protocol to work and not be quote unquote overly secure for its own good. Finally, completeness and zero knowledge without soundness, that is also very easy to achieve. And this is a protocol that always says yes. Can I have $50? Sure. 100? Of course. 1,000,000? Right away. So in fact, we do need the completeness property. It's not as trivial as it might seem. It doesn't just say that, well, the protocol works. It says that the protocol needs to work, and we can't take any shortcuts in trying to achieve security. So there's a few more properties or parameters of zero knowledge protocols. One of them is the setup. Some of them can be used without a setup. Others need to have what's called a trusted setup. A trusted setup means that when using the protocol, there needs to be some common reference file that both the prover and the verifier have access to. And we assume that whoever built that file is actually trustworthy. And this is a very, very strong requirement, because in most cases, if a single person made that file, then that person has the power to cheat in some way on the protocol. So what this implies for real life usage is that we need an additional protocol only somewhat related to what we're actually trying to accomplish, that will involve multiple people in order to build this common reference string. So a trust setup means that we need to have some sort of elaborate ceremony that will produce the setup string in order to ensure that no one person can cheat. Now, the good news is that people have figured this kind of protocols out, and they usually come with a very nice guarantee that if you have n people taking part in that protocol, then only one of them needs to be trustworthy for the protocol to be successful. And by successful, we mean a common reference string is produced that is not under any one person's control. So the idea is that everybody rolls some dice and the randomness is pulled together. And as long as nobody knows what all the dice rolls were, the protocol is fine. So what you're supposed to do is that you're supposed to roll your dice, do stuff with the results, and then throw your dice away and not write down the result. What bad guys might do is write down the result and try and hack everybody else, hoping that they also wrote down the result, resulting in them getting all the dice rolls, and then they can essentially reverse engineer what went into the string, and then they can cheat on the protocol. So a trusted setup is a somewhat elaborate requirement, but it is something that solutions exist for. Now, there's also the question of whether a setup is universal or not. A universal setup means that we can do this setup once, and for any application that is up to some level of complexity, we can reuse the exact same setup, and that is great. Otherwise, we need to rerun part of the setup if we change from a protocol that checks hashes to a protocol that checks, I don't know, public keys to a protocol that checks signatures to a protocol that does something else. So we prefer universal setup, but well, sometimes we sacrifice that for efficiency, and we'll come towards that at the very end of the lecture. There's also the question of interaction. As we mentioned, in blockchain applications, we do not want interaction. We do not want interaction because interaction implies state. So I send the verifier a message, and then the verifier replies something back, which means that the verifier needs to remember what I sent to them and what they replied, because otherwise I could try and say, oh, you asked me about what I had Googled beforehand. So if I go to some company and they ask me about, I don't know, Rust development, and then I pretend to answer as if they asked me about zero knowledge, they need to remember that they asked me about Rust, which implies that this information needs to be saved, which makes everything more expensive. So long story short, we do not want interaction. One way in some protocols to do away with interaction is what's called the fiat heuristic. We'll take a look at that in a bit. And other protocols are just non-interactive by nature. And again, we prefer these. Finally, a very strong property is that of succinctness. And that has to do with the size of the proofs produced. So usually in the context of non-interactive proofs, what happens is that the prover does some calculation and sends a blob of data to the verifier. Now, ideally, you want that blob of data to be very small. In fact, we would be extremely happy if that blob of data has some fixed size that is small and does not depend on the complexity of the problem that we're actually tackling. And this is something that snarks do for us. And by extension, if every proof is quite small, then the verification speed is actually quite quick as well. Sorry, does anybody want to ask a question, or I think somebody's unmuted and maybe echoing? Right, so ideally, we would like this property that proofs are tiny, either in that they're very small in regard to the relation, the statement, the witness, or ideally they have a fixed size, even if our relation is complex and our witness is large. And this succinctness can be both concrete or amortized, with amortized being that, well, if we only use the protocol once, it's not succinct. But if we use it, I don't know, 100 times in a row, then the math averages out into a very low cost. And now with these properties, before we go any further, because I think we're actually moving slower than I had prepared for, we can think of some main areas where we can actually apply zero knowledge. So we have the headline properties of soundness and zero knowledge. And what these tell us is that, well, focusing on zero knowledge, the first idea we have is that we can use zero knowledge protocols for privacy. We can use them to show people that something is true without showing them why, without revealing private information about us, without revealing exactly how qualified we are in an application, without revealing which of a number of tokens belongs to us. A second application is to enforce correct behavior. So if we have some sort of mixing service that in an environment without proofs had the ability to essentially take everybody's money and run, then maybe we can use soundness to force them to behave in a very correct way. And there is an additional property that actually does not have a lot to do with either building privacy, where we only had the standard security and integrity, or building integrity into a private operation that required trust. And that has to do with asynchronous. So we have things that we know how to do, and we can do them pretty cheaply. But if we do a lot of them, they suddenly become expensive. So let's say verifying transactions. You can verify one transaction pretty easily, usually. But at some point, if you verify enough of them, it starts to become a bit of a hassle. And what I mentioned here is we have these protocols that verify quite cheaply, and the size of the proofs and the time they take to verify is constant. So there is some sort of breakpoint where, well, using such a protocol to verify one transaction is wasteful, and it's actually slower than just doing it in the open. But maybe for 100 or 100,000, maybe it's actually cheaper to use a protocol that verifies instead of sending the data itself and verifying it. And this can enable savings in both space and time. So this is the third killer app of zero knowledge, is not using zero knowledge for zero knowledge, just using it to hide the witness, not because you want to keep the witness secret, but because you cannot be bothered to send the witness over the internet. And this is a very, very interesting property. Right. So what I wanted to actually show you now is a short dive into Schnorr's protocol. But it does look like we might run out of time before we go even halfway into it. So let's hear about everyone if they're interested in taking a slightly close look into one specific protocol, or if it's something that you think you can dive into on your own. We will provide references and the slides, obviously, to do in your own time, and move on to essentially the broader picture, which will echo the discussion we had previously. So maybe let's have a show of hands on who would prefer what. Okay, broader picture.
Yeah, I'll put together some references that we can put on the website that you
Sure.
can access if you want to dive deeper.
Okay, so let me think for a minute on what's the minimal amount of information we need to get out of this protocol before we skip it. Okay, so the minimal amount of information we have about this protocol is that it's a 3-move protocol. So we have this prover that is trying to prove some, well, moon math to the verifier. So what happens is that the prover essentially creates a temporary value that's supposed to hide his private information. He sends that to the verifier. The verifier picks a random value C, which is the challenge, sends that to the prover, and then the prover does his final calculation, sends the purported solution S, and the verifier will accept or reject. And now in actually going through the math that prove the properties, well, we do some math and we show that correctness works. And for soundness, or actually knowledge soundness, we have this argument that says the following. Well, we have this Q&A format in the protocol. So the prover says, well, I'm going to show you that this and this holds, and this is my initial argument, if you want. And then the verifier says, well, I'll give you a random number, and you need to answer me based on that. And what we can show is that, well, let's imagine for a minute that if we can ask the prover not on one number, but on two numbers, then we can get his secret out. Which is kind of strange because the protocol only says we're allowed to ask once. But as an experiment, let's assume we were allowed to ask twice. Then math says we could get the secret. So what does this mean? Well, this means that if this kind of prover is successful, then he must be very lucky. Because out of all the possible questions, he cannot answer two of them. Because if he could answer two, then in this hypothetical situation, we could get the secret out. So either he's very, very lucky, or he can get the secret. And we're actually fine with either option, because what in cryptographic numbers is very, very lucky is something like 2 to the minus 128 or 2 to the minus 256, which is literally something that almost never happens. So this is the way we structure the theoretical proofs behind those protocols. And in a similar way, there's this way of structuring the proof about zero knowledge, where, as we were saying before, the way you cheat is that you decide on the question before you start. And that is fair to do because we're building a transcript. There's no two persons in the room actually holding a conversation. We're just sitting by ourselves and playing both parts in whatever order we want. And again, if we cheat in being able to do things out of order, we can produce proofs without ever knowing the witness. So this leads us into this strange situation where knowledge extraction says that there is a way to get the witness out of the prover. And we know that because 5 slides ago, we had a very hand-wavy proof that said so. And also, 2 slides ago, we had a hand-wavy proof that says that we can also fake the protocol without ever knowing the witness. And these two notions seem to contradict each other. So which one is right? And again, that is what we were discussing earlier in the talk. So let's get back into that discussion. So does knowledge extraction really tell us that we can get the witness in a real execution? No. And does zero knowledge tell us that we can fake the protocol execution in such a way that a real verifier will accept it? Again, no. So they're both hypothetical. They tell us what happens in very, very specific situations, and the logical argument is structured in such a way that it gives us some guarantees for the real world. But the way in which we extract knowledge out of the prover is not something that we can actually do in the real world. We do not get to ask them 2 different questions on a 1-question protocol. But what we are able to argue is that if we could, then they would have to know the witness. And if they couldn't, then they usually don't win on that protocol. So again, I'm skipping the details here because we skip the details of the protocol. But essentially, it's quite important to have this separation between how the protocol is operating on the real world and how the arguments in the proof go through and what that implies for us. Now, usually, we would be very happy in just saying that, well, the proofs happen in some imaginary magical world that is different from the real world, and these two notions never interact, so you never need to know about the theoretical world. And that is usually what happens, but not always. So just over 10 years ago, Sony had this thing with some signing keys for PlayStation 3. And what happened is that they were using probably bad randomness, which meant that they actually answered two answers for the same statement, for the same opening argument on the same protocol. And this leaked their keys. And this is how PS3 was hacked. So essentially, Sony managed to trip themselves into going from the real world into the bizarre world inside the proof, and that costed their keys. The way they tripped themselves into bizarre world was by using bad randomness in all likelihood. But the takeaway message is not just to be careful about randomness, is to be very careful about what the requirements for actual use of the protocol in the real world are. And something that is very important and that we will revisit next week in all likelihood is the argument about trusted reference strings. So essentially, if you are using a reference string that was made exclusively by me, then you are not in the real world. You are in the inside the proof where I am able to cheat. So the takeaway is that the proof techniques behind the protocols have some form of cheating in order to satisfy zero knowledge and soundness. You're not really interested in how to perform the cheating because it's not realizable in the real world. But what you should be interested in is how to use the protocols correctly so that you stay in the real world and you're not inadvertently leaking information or allowing people to provide invalid proofs and potentially steal people's money or private info. So to sum up some proof systems that will probably come up in your study in this class and potentially in the applications that you build. So first off, we have Schnorr signatures. These are by far the simplest to go through. They're actually in this slideshow, but we just skipped over them. And the reason why they're actually so simple to go through is that they only do one thing. They allow somebody to prove that they know the discrete log of some value. Now, notwithstanding the fact that we never talked about what a discrete log, they do just that one thing. On the other hand, this one thing is quite useful. It can get us signatures, it can get us with some extra tricks, things like ring signatures used in Monero. So there's quite a lot of use we can get out of even this one tool. And it's also quite easy to get into just to study it for yourself. Then we have a series of proof systems that can be used to represent a very, very large number of relations. So essentially, you can describe any sort of program that you'd run in a computer or virtual machine, and you can make a protocol out of it. So you can make a protocol that says, well, I know of inputs X and W, X being public, W being private, and they can be as big as you want, such that when this program runs on this input, it outputs 0, or it outputs 1, or it outputs 500. And obviously, this is very, very expressive. You can build literally anything on top of that, which is pretty cool. So systems that allow you to do that are Bulletproof, Plonk, and Gross16. They're not the only ones. They're probably the more popular ones, which also builds into the assignment you'll be tackling, which has to do with Circum. As I said, these proof systems can be used to represent any program. And the usual way in which these programs are represented are as circuits or as sets of constraints. And this is a very strange way of programming, because at the same time, you might be writing code that assigns values to variables or signals, or you might be writing code that verifies that an assignment is correct. So in a way, you're writing two programs at the same time. And sometimes these programs feel like they're the same, and sometimes they're completely different. So as an example, suppose you want to check, or suppose that at some point in your program, A divides B. When you're actually doing the calculation, you need to divide B by A by using division and arriving at some result C. When you're doing the verification, you're assuming that C was given to you, and you verify that C times A equals B. So one part of the program does one thing, and one part of the program does its flip thing. You'll see it in more detail. So let's go back to proof systems. So we have Bulletproof, Plonk, and Gross16, and they're actually ranked in this slide in order of efficiency. So Plonk is more efficient than Bulletproofs, and Gross16 is more efficient than Plonk. So why don't we use Gross16 for everything? Well, in some way, we kind of are. It's probably the most popular system, but Plonk is also getting there. And the issue with Plonk and Gross16 is that they require a trusted setup. Plonk setup is somewhat nicer, but still not entirely transparent. Gross16 setup is a bit fussier, but it makes up for that in efficiency. And efficiency, especially in terms of the verifier, is key. Essentially, it's probably infeasible to run a non-trivial bulletproof verifier inside a smart contract. So either you need to be doing something native with zero knowledge, or if you want to use zero knowledge protocols inside the smart contracts, you either need to have a super simple protocol that can be done expressed as a Sigma protocol that looks like a Schnorr signature, or a slightly more complex version than that. Or if you want to go full hog and just check a circuit-based proof, you need Plonk or Gross16 or something similar, such as Sonic, Marlin, or one of the same family. Right, so this was today's material minus the Schnorr setup. If we have some time, we could check some more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pyrros. This is really great, and we actually right on time. So I suggest, because the next class will also be taught by you, Pyrros, so we can actually have some questions offline, and we can consolidate and let people digest it a little bit, and then maybe we'll resume next class. But meanwhile, maybe we can also answer some questions in the practical session on Monday, if you don't mind. Yeah, would that be a plan? Yeah.
Possibly. I think we could probably handle questions about this issue in Discord, and
Yeah, let's do some
and
of that
maybe
on
if
Discord.
people are really interested, we could go back into something probably next week.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Excellent. And thanks for everyone for showing up. So I'll see you guys on Discord. We'll continue the conversation there. We'll also announce assignment 0 in a minute, and we'll take it from there. All right. See you.
Sure.
Have a
Cheers,
good
everyone.
day.